Welcome to the local campaign, and thank you for joining us for our debate today in Capital Ward. We are going to introduce the candidates who are seeking your vote on October the 22nd in just a moment, but I'm going to quickly walk through the rules for our debate today. We are going to start with opening statements. They will be 1 minute in length. Each candidate will have an opportunity to speak directly to you, the voters, and we drew the order for those opening statements at random just before our telecast. Then we'll move into a series of debates about the important topics in Capital Ward and throughout the city of Ottawa. In each case, I will start the discussion with a question directed at one of the candidates. That candidate will have 45 seconds to respond to that question on his or her own, and then we'll open it up to several minutes of debate from all of the candidates, during which time they can challenge each other, rebut what each other are saying, add their own comments, speak directly to you, and debate the issues thoroughly. At the conclusion of each debate, we'll go back to the candidate to whom the question was originally directed, and that person will have 30 seconds to wrap up on that topic. We will move through a number of different topics that way, and then we'll conclude with closing statements. We'll do those in the opposite order of the opening statements, and once again, they will be 1 minute in length. So let's meet the candidates who are on the ballot in the municipal election on October the 22nd in Ward 17, Capital Ward. They are Christine McAllister, Shawn Menard, Anthony Carricato, David Chernushenko, and Jide Afolabi. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here for the debate. Let's begin with the opening statements, and we'll start with Christine McAllister.
Thank you, Mark. If my mom were alive, she would be so proud that the daughter she raised as a single mom living in social housing were running for election. But she wouldn't be surprised because I've always been involved in something. I started volunteering in Capital Ward 15 years ago. Since then, I've brought people together to reopen a community centre, to protect the Muchmore playing field, and to ensure community-friendly developments. These local issues matter, and so do citywide concerns like affordable housing, public transit, and the environment. For me, community service means connecting, listening, learning, and leading. I've led the city's largest community association. I've led national projects for Payments Canada. And as a woman, I'll bring a different perspective to council. Please vote for me, Christine McAllister.
All right, thank you. Next up, with a 1 minute opening statement, is Shawn Menard.
Thanks very much, Mark. You know, when I put my name forward for City Council, it was for one reason. This City Hall has lost its way. It has become too beholden to developers, has ignored its responsibility to act on climate change, and is no longer an open and transparent government. Our campaign has not just been about words, but about taking real action in Capital Ward. Saving century-old trees, presenting at Planning Committee on privatization of green spaces, and holding rallies to put pressure on derelict buildings. I'm currently the Public School Board Trustee for Capital Ward, and I've been a senior staff member of the Big City Mayor's Caucus and for FCM. And I've seen the innovation happening in other cities that we need to bring here to Ottawa. We've already started building the grassroots citywide coalition necessary to ensure that communities within the Greenbelt receive the services that they deserve. We need to be conscious that these services are not always equitable to all residents and work to correct that. You can count on our team to deliver the most progressive agenda of any candidate in this race. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up is Anthony Carricato. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Anthony Carricato, and I'm running to be your next City Councillor in Capital Ward because we deserve better representation at City Hall. I have a vision for our community that includes better rules to guide smart development, greener and more resilient neighborhoods, and results for our community. I have the experience, the education, and the energy to get the job done. Since I launched my campaign over 4 months ago, I have knocked on over 12,000 doors, and the consensus is clear. It's time for change in Capital Ward. It's time for a councillor who can collaborate with his colleagues in other parts of the city and achieve results for our community. And that's why I'm running to be your next City Councillor. On October 22nd, I hope I can earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is David Chernushenko. Go ahead, you have 1 minute as well.
Lasting, meaningful politics is about listening, understanding, making your case, and hearing everyone else's. Above all, it's about bridge building. You identify a goal, develop a strategy, find your allies, and then you work and work and work until you get there, just like building a bridge. Speaking of a bridge, if anyone is wondering if they need a stronger voice, a more forceful personality to accomplish more for Capital Ward, I offer you the Flora Footbridge, set to open 5 years ahead of schedule, partly because of a motion I passed that anticipated transferring money from another project should that one not receive approval. Working with community leaders and city staff, we made sure the project was shovel-ready to qualify for federal and provincial dollars. First, I built bridges, and now we're building a bridge. That was my formula to get safety improvements on Bronson, the O'Connor bike lane, an underpass at Billings Bridge, and of course, Main Street. Who could have imagined winning a council vote by 16 to 8 and bringing votes from all across the spectrum? How did that happen? Strategy, allies, perseverance, bridge building.
Okay, thank you. Finally, Jide Afolabi, go ahead. You have 1 minute as well.
Thank you. In fundamental terms, this election is about the future of our city. As Ottawa hits the 1 million person mark, our city is at a crossroads. Ever more innovative solutions will be required to maintain livability, environmental stewardship, prosperity, and hope in our shared future. Refusing to innovate would mean a slow march towards the failures we have seen elsewhere. Massive sprawl, gridlock, high crime, high pollution, dead zones, lost heritage. Much indeed is at stake. These are the reasons why, for me, this election is about everything we can do to ensure we advance into the future with bold ideas. The very best ideas for a most deserving city. In my future version of Ottawa, our large flat rooftops will be green. And people would know that a swarm of green shirts means that the Ottawa Tree Corps is hard at work. In my future version of Ottawa, residents would stop developer proposals and variances that go overboard. And we would bring traffic.
Thank you. We'll have to stop there, but we do have lots of time to get into all of the issues now. I'm going to start the first debate with a question to Christine McAllister, and she will have 45 seconds to respond to this question, then we'll open it up to everyone. So in the past 4 years, there have been a number of developments that have caused people throughout the community, including in Capital Ward, to be concerned about the fact that height limits and community design plans, in their view, are being set aside in favor of high levels of intensification. Is the city becoming too responsive to developers and not doing enough to respect the wishes of residents?
Thank you, Mark. That's a great question, and one that I've been hearing about at the doors. It's the top issue that I've been hearing about, absolutely. And what I really think is missing in our development process is respect for the community expertise that exists. There are many people throughout the ward who have a lot of understanding of the needs of the community, the importance of the character of the buildings and the neighborhoods. And many people do feel like the developers are able to impose their will on communities that are really out of the character of the neighborhood. So this is something that's very important to us, and we really need to have more community expertise in the planning process.
Okay, it's open to everyone on this topic now.
Well, look, I want to see densification and intensification downtown. I'm a new urbanist, but right now what's happening is disrespect for communities and disrespect for zoning that exists. Right now, 50% of Capital Ward is developable. That means that we can develop within the current zoning that we have, but unfortunately, developers for profit-making motives are going above and beyond what communities are prepared to accept, not listening, and going further than we should allow them to. What we're proposing is an absolute adherence to the zoning that happens here. Stop the 15 times over donations that are happening from developers through their family members to candidates, keeping the same candidates in there year after year, giving these sweetheart deals back to them. We need to push back hard. It is not the time for middle-of-the-road policies. We need to ensure that we're actually fighting back to ensure that our community comes first.
Listen, it's clear that the current system actually favors this kind of thing happening. We have a system in place whereby instead of having set rules that are that can be violated, we have rules that mean that developers can walk in, ask for a variance, get it, and then proceed to do as they wish. What I'm asking for, what I'm pushing for, is a counter-variance bylaw. Essentially, let's restore some balance. Let's have neighborhoods have a say in the process, and a say that is as strong as the one developers have. So essentially, a petition with teeth. If you have a set number of people who say, you know what, I don't like this happening, I am going to push back and I am going to actually sign a petition and submit it to City Council or to City Hall, then what happens is the developer's variance gets squashed. I think it's only fair. I think it's the way to proceed. I think it's possible for us to restore some balance, but we have to do it in a way that is fixed as what is happening right now with development, which is developers tend to get their way.
I think what we really need at City Hall is clarity and certainty for developers, but especially for residents. Right now, the process is totally unclear, and we're getting caught in the middle. I will advocate for clarity and certainty so developers know what they can ask for and won't have to go back to City Hall for 3, sometimes 4 years for approval process, and certainty, especially for residents, so they know what to expect when future development comes into our neighborhood, so that ultimately we can be proud of that development instead of anger and animosity. In Heron Park, I'm hearing about the abundance of rooming houses popping up everywhere. The R4 zoning has to be better enforced. 1053 Secord is just the latest example. 177 Hopewell in Old Ottawa South is another. We need a dose of common sense. I want to give residents voice so we have better rules to guide smart development and obtain clarity for both residents and developers.
It's not becoming too developer-centric at City Hall. It has been for a long time, for decades actually. And that's the system, and the system has to change. That's the system that I've been fighting against for my 8 years on council, and all of us would still be fighting against if not for a number of the changes that I've helped to accomplish during my 2 terms. First of all, the Infill 1 and Infill 2 guidelines now taking on stronger status in the next official plan. The end to conversions, the R3 and R4 development reviews, which now need to find their way into having teeth in the next official plan, and ultimately working with the previous provincial government on Ontario Municipal Board review. I worked from the outset of being elected with Yasser Naqvi and others to ensure that the Ontario Municipal Board would be reformed. That has happened. We now have a local planning tribunal. With that, with the fact that now developers cannot automatically appeal an official plan, they can't even appeal the official plan at all, we have the opportunity for the first time to rewrite the official plan with teeth, to rewrite an official plan that puts affordability, environment, climate, and certainty, planning certainty first. I championed all of those things and will continue to do that because the cynicism that we now have in the public means that on a number of the projects that came to Planning Committee and City Hall just in the past year, we had almost no one come out and speak against them from the community. Not because they weren't objecting to them, not at all, because they were saying, what's the point? That's bad for democracy, that's bad for this city, and I've been championing that and will continue to do that.
See, but ultimately we can't expect that people who have objections to development will go to some tribunal to get their issues resolved. So we have to be able to cauterize it at the front end, and I believe that's a counter-variance bylaw. You say, you know what, it's a simple process. If you sign a petition, and if you say, I don't like this thing, and enough of your neighbors do the same thing, then automatically you have a stop to the variance. It's that simple. Then we aren't worrying about, do I need to hire a lawyer? Do I need to fundraise and put money aside just to fight something that I know is bad for my neighborhood? It shouldn't work that way.
Exactly. And that's where the local planning tribunal puts the power back.
With all due respect to David,
the
local planning tribunal has also been a huge challenge for residents in our community. They're still going there and coming back with results that they're not satisfied with. And in fact, you know, David, I wish that you weren't as middle of the road on these developments like you have been on Bank and Fifth. That was a development that you should have voted against, but you voted in favor of it instead.
Along with the Glebe Community Association,
getting small
who took a
concessions on developments that at the end
Yeah.
of the day are not in the best interest of communities is not what we need here. We need somebody to stand up and fight back.
The Glebe Community Association and I decided that we wanted a community design plan for the Glebe, and that was the motion that I voted for on 5th and Bank, not for the project.
But Christine McAllister, you get the last 30 seconds on this. It was your question.
So I can say that the Glebe Community Association has put a ton of work into these developments, trying to find improvements where we can, because we felt completely overrun by what the developers were proposing and felt there was no opportunity to have influence. So that was the amount of work that's been done to achieve minor adjustments has been enormous. Community design plans are great, but they need to have real teeth in secondary plans and through the official plan, and I hope that's what we get and what I'll work for next.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Shawn Menard. Should we freeze transit fares in Ottawa?
Well, look, I'm on record as saying that the truth is the City of Ottawa has some of the highest fares in North America, and our ridership is actually declining as a result. So the steady state and the plan that David has voted for year after year is actually to increase transit fares for the next couple of decades. To me, that is unsustainable in a city of ours. And so what we're proposing is actually free public transit down Bank Street, much like the cities of Calgary and Winnipeg have in their downtowns. They have free lines on the C line. And we're saying that, look, if folks really want to ensure a better modal share to take cars off of the road, we need to improve service reliability of transit, which is not something that is up to par and up to snuff in this city of Ottawa. So we'll work hard to make sure that those types of new ideas are put forward in this election.
Okay,
Look,
so can everyone now?
Oh, sorry, Mark. Thanks. I'm in favor of helping those on fixed incomes like students and seniors reduce fares for public transit. But you know what? What I'm hearing at the doors is not a problem about price or cost, but rather an issue of reliability. I spoke to Amelia on campus at Carleton U last week, and she told me that she's often having to dig into her pocket and take a cab to get to class on time or to go to her part-time job. That's not right. What we need is to improve bus service and reliability before we start talking about reducing fares.
I am hearing about fares at the doors. Just the other day on Belmont from someone who was saying he and his wife, the choice of whether to drive downtown versus take the bus, it's a non-starter for them. Hop in the car, the two of them. You can find free parking somewhere if you're careful with the hours. And as much as they are cyclists and, in theory, bus riders, they would end up doing that. That's without even putting children and a whole family into the equation. What we have to do is to keep our fares down as low as we possibly can, but also tackle it at the other end. Why is there free parking available downtown? Why are we not moving to variable rates depending on the time of day and the amount of congestion? That is something that I actually moved in council. It was quashed very quickly by anyone other than about 4 or 5 of us urban councillors, because this was something, the idea that people might pay more for what they're getting was apparently unthinkable. But I'm going to come back at it. It was something with the Sustainable Transportation Coalition I've had a lot of conversations with. I'm going to come back with that one. We want people riding our buses. We've got to offer the service. I'm pleased that I was able to get increased service on the numbers 1 and 7 down Bank Street on weekends when it had gone to very sporadic service. If we want people to not be trying to come to Lansdowne, Old Ottawa South, the Glebe in their own cars, we've got to have them thinking, wow, why would I drive and deal with that? The bus is going by regularly, so we're up to much more frequent service there.
The bus is going by regularly, but it's often full, and so people can't rely on it, David. I'm sorry to say,
but on weekends it is not full. There's plenty of space.
Well,
it's quite clear
the bus has gone too far.
Quite clear that our public transit system needs to be more accessible, more convenient for people. I've been hearing in different pockets of the ward, like at Carleton and like in Old Ottawa East, that it's just too far, or the buses aren't coming often enough, or the schedule isn't appropriate for the needs of the community. So we really do need to make it more accessible and convenient to people, and we also need to make it more cost effective for people. If it's more expensive and more difficult to drive, people will take the bus. But if it's more convenient for them to be in a car, then that's what they'll do. And so we really need to look at ways to be investing in our public transit system at the same time as reducing our fares, which absolutely will increase ridership.
I think it's important to look at... Fare freeze is critical. That's clear. But we need to be able to afford it. So how do we afford it? That's the question here. We need both a fare freeze and we need better service. Both of those things ultimately go to cost. The only way we're going to be able to afford it, I believe, is new revenue sources. Now, that doesn't mean the property tax base, right? But we have a huge potential in this city that we hardly ever look at. And that's tourism. We have about 5 million tourists that visit the city every year. We expand our population base periodically per year 5-fold, and we don't tax that enough. Now, if we were to tax them even just a little bit, we wouldn't have a transit issues. So a lot of this is about thinking outside the box. It's about having bold ideas that we follow through on and solve our problems that way. So that's what I'm advocating for us.
I think we need to look at the fact that what is the cost of not drastically lowering transit fares? Climate change is the greatest threat facing this city through flooding. And we're contributing more and more to that the higher we raise our transit fares, which this councillor has voted in favor of year after year. And so you can say all you want that you want to freeze fares or lower transit fare costs, but when you're voting in favor after year, that doesn't compute. Transit is also a gender issue. Predominantly more women are taking transit than men are. And so if we're to really do a gender-based analysis of our decisions at City Council, transit fares don't just need to be frozen. They need to come down drastically. The last thing I'll say about this before the wrap-up session is that, we're spending $50 million on average in the budget every single year on brand new roads. That's not fixing the roads we have, but brand new roads. We need to be reallocating some of those funds for those brand new roads back into services like public transit, which save money for the city rather than roads which are an exponential cost for the city of Ottawa.
Mark, I'm glad you asked that question about fares, because the cost ultimately to the rider is also tied in with where they live. And what the city has to do, and I was pleased to vote on a motion to make this possible, indeed mandatory, is so that all of our transit stations, we now maximize in a circumference around those the amount of affordable housing. Because when we have people who can least afford housing living right next to transit, we've brought down the cost of the housing, and we've put them right at the most convenient place, because those are the people who cannot turn to their cars to move elsewhere. That's all they've got is transit.
Nor can those who have disabilities and accessibility problems. I spoke to Hollis yesterday. Hollis is in a wheelchair and lives at Carlton U. He says he cannot live his life spontaneously because paratranspo is completely unreliable. He has to call at 7 a.m. today in order to schedule a bus for any time tomorrow. That's completely ridiculous. And I think before we talk about increasing or decreasing fares, we need to talk about increasing reliability.
Okay, we'll stop there. Shawn Menard, I asked you the question, so you get the final 30 seconds.
Thanks very much, Mark. In this campaign, I think it's important to point out that we're the only ones right now with our platform that has been speaking about transit fares across this city. There has not been a discussion amongst these other candidates about these fares until today. And so I'm proud to say that we're raising issues like free public transit, which 100 municipalities across the world currently have. The City of Ottawa needs bigger, bolder ideas to ensure that we're actually not just talking about 2% a year, but actually moving this city forward with new voices.
All right, thank you. Next question is to Anthony Carricato. And speaking of 2% a year, where would you set property tax increases for the next 4 years? And what would you do about what some people consider to be mounting pressure on city expenditures in areas like infrastructure and social services?
Thanks, Mark. I think 2% should be the ceiling and not the floor. The reason we're even having this conversation is that city spending is up 5 to 6% every year. Before we go back to the ATM and ask residents to pay more cash year after year for property tax, let's focus on getting city spending under control. When taxes go up 2% across the city, the reality is in Capital Ward, they go up actually 5 or 6%. I think that's unreasonable and unaffordable. The system's broken and we can't continue it. We pay disproportionately more in Capital Ward, and I will advocate for tax fairness.
All right, it's open to everyone on this now.
You know what? That's all. Go ahead.
Mark, I think that 2% is actually just the wrong question. I think what we really need to be considering is, what do we want in our city? What's in our vision for the city, and what's in the future? We have some real challenges in the city. Affordable housing, to name one. Having a sustainable environment, to name another. We have a lot of strategies in our budget that aren't costed. We have an urban forest management strategy or plan that's built out for 20 years that doesn't have a cost plan to go with it, doesn't have long-term funding. At the same time, when we're trying to rebuild our urban forest cover, we allow developments to take down trees that degrade our forest cover. And so the question really is about how we want to invest our money, and are we doing that in the best way possible?
Listen, our needs are many. There's housing, there's childcare, there's environmental stewardship. But at the same time, we can't keep going to the same well over and over again. But we can't also believe that we only have the one well. It doesn't work that way. We have other sources of revenue in the city, especially because this is a city that stands apart from any other city in the country. I've been to a lot of cities in the country, and you know, I'll give you an example, and I love the city, Saskatoon. They don't have what we have here in Ottawa because they aren't the carpet of an entire country. We have a lot of visitors that come into this city. So why don't we tax a little bit? I've been to countries in Europe where that's exactly what happens. And no one's going to say, you know what, I wouldn't visit Ottawa this year because of that $10 that got tacked onto my hotel room the last time I was there. You know, so if we start thinking differently, we can afford a lot of the things that we do need to afford. So we need to stop thinking about, say, are we going to move beyond 2% and start thinking about where else can we get this funding from, because our needs are there and they're only going to get more complex.
Look, it is arbitrary and electorally expedient to talk about a target of tax rates around 2% or less. I'm sorry, but that is not sustainable in a city like Ottawa. Currently, the inflation rate in June was 2.5%. That doesn't take into account the population growth that the city is also experiencing. In Capital Ward, we are certainly subsidizing sprawl in this city. 1/5 of folks' taxpayer dollars go to subsidize sprawl. And that's unfortunate. We should be ensuring that we're having intensification and densification in the downtown. But when it comes to tax rates, I want to make sure that residents are receiving the services that they need and that they're paying for right now in Capital Ward. The parks, Brewer Park, can't get an upgrade. It's like pulling teeth. Same with Windsor Park. Whereas we're subsidizing sprawl in the suburban areas to get the types of services that they want. Brand new pieces of infrastructure. I think you should look up Jonathan McLeod's piece on taxes recently. He talked about parity of the house you live in and what Ottawans pay a bit less than Torontonians do in their average house. There is no reason why we shouldn't be talking about services and the needs in Ottawa that are being ignored right now because of the mayor's arbitrary tax 2% figure, which is completely wrong in a city like Ottawa. We should be growing. We are growing. We need to make sure the services match the tax rates.
I often hear from people that they'd be prepared to pay more for on their taxes in order to get better services. But then I just as often and even more often hear from people that they're already overtaxed, that they can't possibly do that. So we have to tread very carefully when we start thinking about more than 2%. I have agreed over 2 terms to the target of 2%, but not to be tied to it. Why is that? Because city staff have to go out and assemble a draft budget. And they do that with the target in mind, looking at the services we'd offered in the past and what we were tied to, and then come back and debate that. I've argued vehemently on a number of issues, more parks planners so that we can do the work that's needed in Capital Ward, and put forward a number of tax cuts. But I've also put forward ideas for revenue. I think Jide has raised some interesting ideas about the tourism tax, but congestion pricing is something that this city has not been prepared to go towards, but I will continue to push for. It's something that's done in so many other cities, and it accomplishes multiple goals. The objective isn't really to raise more money from people, but that is a benefit of trying to shift their behavior to less car-intensive transportation, tackling climate change, and at the same time, should they choose to continue a car-intensive behavior, then there would be revenue raised that can be used for a number of other social things, as well as funding our transportation system, which we heard about earlier.
With all due respect to the councillor, this city is currently starving for services. We have 15% poverty living in Capital Ward alone. There are services that are going unheeded, like potholes, bike lanes, snow clearing, right in our downtown. So to say you're arbitrarily committed to this 2% tax rate a year, to me, is surprising. I think that we need to ensure that services are first met, and that then we decide the tax rate based on a services need, because those services aren't being met. We've also proposed a mansion tax in the city of Ottawa, okay? Much like British Columbia has. Right, that's supposed to bring in $200 million for British Columbia through a mansion tax for homes valued over $3 million a year. It's these types of innovative ideas that other cities have, that I've seen by working with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, that we need to be looking at right here in Ottawa, so that the few pay a little bit more so that the many can benefit in our city.
And Shawn, I
was in Vancouver last week, and Ottawa is not Vancouver. There are very few houses at $3 million in our city. So we need to look at where the money really is, and we need to be innovative about it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have to stop there, but Anthony Carricato, I asked you the question, so you get the last 30 seconds.
Thanks, Mark. While Shawn wants to raise your taxes, I will advocate for tax fairness. Seniors in our ward can't remain in their homes when property taxes continue to rise year after year. It's something I've heard in all parts of our community, be it in the Glebe, in Old Ottawa South, Old Ottawa East, etc. Let's focus on getting spending under control before we go back to the ATM and ask residents to pay more money.
All right, thank you. Next question is for David Chernushenko. What role can the city play in addressing inequality and income disparity in Ottawa?
That is such an important issue because we as politicians, as elected officials, we hear from people who have the skills, the connections to make their voices heard, and that is often the very privileged and not those who don't know how or have the connections to get their voices heard. So we have to reach out to understand the issues that we're not addressing well enough. Housing is very clearly one of those. And that's why at the center of my platform, right at the top, is affordable housing tied in to our official plan, where we are using inclusionary zoning, a new tool available under the province just now. We're looking at Section 37 as a possibility, looking at air rights above all transit, and also any public property is looking at affordable housing first.
It's open to everyone now.
Yeah. Well, David, I also noticed in your 2014 platform that affordable housing was at the top of the list. And you know what? The city hasn't moved any further ahead on that. So you've had your turn, and I value that, but we need a housing first policy in place here in Ottawa. Like you said, we have an opportunity in the next term of council to build in inclusionary zoning, and I will certainly advocate for that in our new official plans. Developers don't make the best landlords, nor do governments. But there's no question the city can be doing much more than we have. And as I said, I will be advocating for a housing first policy. It's totally unacceptable what the last term of council has done and has allowed this problem to get so far out of hand.
Look, this is a really important issue. I was raised by a single mom on assistance, and so I understand the value of affordable housing in this city. Right now, just from 2016 to 2017, we actually tripled the number of chronically homeless families in the city of Ottawa, which is unacceptable. We've got the situation of Haringate going on right now, where hundreds of families are being evicted, and this council is doing precious little. We're talking about things like affordable housing, and I've met with the CCOC, a great affordable housing provider. They've said that we've got to do three things here. We need to build more affordable housing along transit lines, not just luxury condos like is happening now, that 65-story tower going up that we gave them $8 million for. We need to make sure that inclusionary zoning is is mandatory for units of more than 10 units, and you can say, look, at 20% is an achievable goal for that sort of thing. And we need to make sure that affordable housing is available to folks, not just from the provincial and federal government funding it, but actually the City of Ottawa putting in its own funding, which is not happening to a great degree right now. So we need to solve these challenges as a community, and that's not happening with this current council. We need change on this council to get anywhere on this issue. There's a 10,000 person waiting list in the City of Ottawa, and we really need to start pushing back against that. Other cities across this country, like Medicine Hat, have actually solved homelessness by implementing not just a housing first priority, but having the wraparound supports with medical needs, and it's actually a 2-to-1 savings if you look at it. So this is a savings potential for the City of Ottawa that we need to be investing in housing and ensure that it's affordable for folks who need it.
Listen, as someone who arrived here as an immigrant years ago and went through the entire system, I've used public housing, I have used the food bank system, I have worked through the entire gamut of it all. And I can tell you the question here is this: what does upward mobility look like in 2018? My fear is that the Ottawa I arrived in all those years ago may be changing such that it's becoming more difficult for people to actually advance now. And that's part of what I want to help change in council. So I believe we need to support housing, and we need a lot more housing stocks. And the way we get there is through what I call inclusionary zoning plus. Because inclusionary zoning alone is not going to get us there, and this is why. If we're relying on developers to simply build and then we'll insert a slate of units in there that are public, we are still relying on them to build. So if we're to get there, we need to unilaterally build as well. We need to build properly and build smartly and use smart financing. So, for example, you could buy a unit in a condo, but if you have the funds, why not buy a smaller one as well? Buy two, share with the city, and have somebody live there at a cheaper rent. So we need to think smartly about these things. If we do that, our future is a lot more secure. So we have the housing issue. We have food as an issue. We have upward mobility generally, jobs and internships as an issue. All these things have to be fixed properly if we are to advance and have people go through the process I went through and go through successfully. I'm afraid that may not happen, so I'm trying to see if I can change that.
And Mark, if I can just jump in, I really believe that talent is ubiquitous, but opportunity is not. And so I absolutely agree that things like affordable housing and lower bus fares are the kind of things that would make opportunities more available and address some of these income inequalities and diversity challenges that we have. Another really important thing we could do is I take up Diane Deans' suggestion on a women's bureau that could bring a gender lens and then maybe a diversity lens to the actions, the budget, the different policies that we have to make sure that the benefits of the policies that we're implementing actually accrue across the board and help those who are more disadvantaged economically, diversity or otherwise, so that we can really reap the benefits that everybody has to offer and give all of our citizens the opportunity to contribute. I myself grew up in social housing, and that gave me the leg up so that I could go and get an education. And then, I've been very fortunate through the rest of my life to have great employment and to be able to live in a healthy, happy, and stable community.
Mark, I would like a chance to speak on this one,
actually,
please.
you're going to get the last 30 seconds because I asked you the question, so if you don't mind, we'll let someone else go.
I completely agree with Christine's point. I think, though, we need to be doing even more. I met with a homeless man named Richard in the Glebe, and he sleeps on benches on a regular basis. And the answer for him was simple. I said, what are you looking for? Should we be calling Salvation Army? What do we need to do here? And he said, I need a home. And it's that simple. Build homes.
David Chernushenko, you do get the last 30 seconds.
There are many ways in which we can address social issues and poverty, but housing really is at the top. Safe, healthy, affordable housing. But we have to remember, a municipality has 9% of the tax base. When polled, Ontarians think a city has 22% of the tax base. So before we start promising that we're going to spend more as a city with city money without raising taxes, we have to say we can only find that additional money by raising them much higher. That's not the way to go. The so-called senior levels of government have that money. We have to prepare the projects and use that money.
Thank you. The next question will be to Jide Afolabi. Would you support a private cannabis store in Capital Ward?
See, cannabis is about to become legal. And we have to face the fact that it's going to happen. Now, it comes with a whole bunch of upsides, as well as a whole bunch of downsides. The upsides, entrepreneurs are going to have the potential here to get out there, sell new products, add to the tax base, employ people. In 20 years, we're talking about a vibrant neighborhood that includes cannabis as part of the mix. But there are challenges. Keeping cannabis out of school zones is one. Ensuring you don't have them spaced so closely together is another. Overall, I think the answer is yes, but I think we have to be careful about how we implement it.
Okay, it's open to everyone now.
If there was ever a policy that needed extensive consultation, this is one. Cannabis regulation is coming, and obviously we can't change that. But we do have children in our communities that are at the utmost top of our minds in terms of protecting. And so the city has a role to play here and really needs to be founded in consultations and engagement with the community so we can fully understand the impacts and the concerns of the community and try to use the tools that are available to the city, be it zoning, be it business licensing, public consumption, all of those tools to work really hard to address the issues that are raised by the community through extensive consultations.
The city has begun now preparing the consultation process because I totally agree, Christine, that's absolutely essential here. This is unknown territory for us. Even when we look in other cities, in other countries where they've gone this route, we're really going wide open here in Canada in a way not seen in other places. We do have the experience of some other places, but the key issues to me of concern have just been exacerbated by the provincial government's decision to move towards private as opposed to an LCBO type model, a public provider. The trouble with this is that we will likely see clustering in certain areas where we'll see quite a number of private sellers on one street, a kind of ghettoization, if you will, and I don't think that's at all good. Quality control is an issue as well. If there's one thing that can be said for an LCBO type model, it's that you do have an accountable public body that reports back that there is some kind of accountability to a government body. I'm concerned about private pot shops. It seems that's the route that we are going, so we are going to have to get out there with our citizens and hear what their issues are and their preferences are around all of these issues.
I think we need to be ready for this change that's coming soon to our city. And again, as a community, we can make sure that zoning is appropriate. We have that opportunity, and that we make sure that these businesses are kept away from our schools where children go to school, where they learn and where they play. And we also have the opportunity to make sure that they're not clustered together with the appropriate zoning. And I look forward to the opportunity and this new challenge, because you're right, it is unseen territory in Canada, and it's a once in a lifetime that we need to get it right from the beginning.
Look, if we're going to have a legal framework for cannabis and end prohibition, which is what's happening, then it needs to be readily accessible to those users and those folks who are going to consume. We need to make sure that that is not in the hands of drug dealers and in folks who would benefit from that illegally, as the federal government has said, but ensure that people do have regulated access to a substance that I believe is no worse than alcohol. That being said, I am a school board trustee. I've seen firsthand and heard from parents on our parent councils about their concern about where these would be located. We need to make sure that they're located in the proper areas, not too close to schools, and in a way that is accessible to the broader community in other areas. You know, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has put out a fantastic document on this, and one of the things they're calling for on cannabis is to ensure that the federal government, through the provinces, are actually paying the fair share for around policing issues on these and around enforcement, so that municipalities receive their fair share. We need to make sure that we're working with the federal government, who have been the arbiters on this issue, to ensure that the city of Ottawa is getting its fair due. And last thing I mentioned on this is that our new MPP in Ottawa Centre is actually holding a forum on this on September 22nd that folks can go to and listen about how this may impact municipalities and the province of Ontario.
Okay. Anyone else? Jide?
Yes. So when I think about cannabis, I get very hopeful and I get very afraid. I'm hopeful because I think about the jobs and I think about the tax base. So those are all good things. I get afraid because I think about clustering, like David just mentioned. So think about Vanier. We have rules in place for how we space out things in a city, but we still have a lot of payday loans clustered together in Vanier. I'm afraid of that happening vis-a-vis cannabis. We have to get it right. If we don't get it right, we would see the downloading of a massive new problem from other levels of government to us, and we can't abide that. So it's important we get it right.
I totally agree. I think the other thing we absolutely have to get right is this issue of where people are able to consume. We're hearing about in apartment buildings, in condominiums. Ottawa was a world leader in becoming a smoke-free city with many smoke-free places. We have to take that same model to cannabis now. You know the smell. You smell it everywhere now. People seem to think it's open season. That cannot happen in this city. It may be legal. It's going to have its place in the city, literally its place. There are severe health effects. We cannot have people thinking it's healthy, it's fine, it's fun. People have to understand the consequences of cannabis consumption.
Jide Afolabi, we asked you the question, so you get to go another 30 seconds on this.
So part of getting it right is also thinking about who is going to pay for the issues, because there will be issues. So if we implement this, and we have to because it's federal law, we have to think about where are the funds going to come from for the medical help that's going to come along with it, for enforcement, for driving while under the influence. All these things are issues we have to think about. And I think part of what we do is cluster together as municipalities and ask the federal government to take care of it.
We'll move to the next question now. Christine McAllister, this one is yours. So would you support photo radar on residential streets, and what other steps can be taken to make the streets safer for pedestrians and cyclists?
Right, and this is one of the top issues that I'm hearing at the door. The most common issues for sure is safety in the streets for cyclists, for pedestrians, for parents who are walking their kids, and also for seniors who are out in the community as well. And so I think, a handful of years ago, the Glebe Community Association did quite a large study over a period of time, a traffic safety study on the roads in the Glebe, and came up with a plan for quite a few changes to the way traffic moves in the neighborhood. And we were successful at having the city adopt that. And I think we really need to look at things like photo radar and the specific challenges in different places that we have in the community.
Okay, let's open everyone now.
Thanks, Mark. Look, speed kills. We know that. We can design our roads so that there is less fatalities and less injuries on our roads. One of the ways that we can do that is actually by lowering the residential speed limit. It needs to come down from 40 to 30 kilometers an hour. At the moment, Bank Street is not safe at all. It's unfortunate because right now we've got cyclists going over there, pedestrians after a Red Blacks game that feel unsafe with buses zooming by. That's a street that needs improved safety in our city. I'd also absolutely support photo radar. There's been umpteen studies on this. The results and the evidence is proven. We need some photo radar in certain areas of this city to ensure that folks are slowing down and not causing as many catastrophic injuries. The other thing I'll mention is around school zones. As a school board trustee, I know that there's safety issues all around schools. We need to make sure that photo radar is looked at in areas of school jurisdiction. And one of the best things we can actually do is actually get cars off the road to ensure safety. We need to look at other things like modal share and ensuring that, hey, free public transit down Bank Street, again, which Calgary and Winnipeg have, is something that we look into to get cars off the road to ensure safety of pedestrians and cyclists.
I think we need more enforcement, and that's key. Again, like Christina said, it is one of the #1 issues I hear day after day as I'm canvassing throughout our ward. In some parts of our ward, and we all know which ones they are, it's not necessarily just Bank Street, it's Bronson Street. Bronson is a free-for-all. I spoke to Tara on Lakeside. She's got 4 children. They all go to school in the Glebe. They live at Dow's Lake. They have to cross Bronson every day. She is scared. She called the Ottawa Police to see what they could do about this. And they said, you know what, Tara, we're sorry, but it's unsafe to have an officer there. That is totally unacceptable. If it's unsafe to have a cop, why is it safe to have a 5-year-old cross that street every day? Traffic calming measures work, yes, and we should continue to explore using them and working with community associations and talking to residents on those streets to see where we can make improvements. And I will certainly look forward to that challenge as your next city councillor.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Anthony, the question of whether it's even safe for police to be doing enforcement on those streets, because that's the absurdity of the so-called rights argument that we shouldn't use photo radar. Without hesitation, I support photo radar. I did so at council. I urged that we go further than just school zones. Ultimately, too many of my fellow councillors felt that it was only politically expedient to go after school zones. Well, that's a great start, but it's not nearly enough. In the words of Jeanette Sadiq Khan, the so-called guru of transportation rebirth in New York City, she said, why would you use people at their risk and the cost of a police officer to do something that technology can do? It works. And yet there's this absurd argument out there that somehow that's taking away someone's rights. Their right to what? The right to kill? the right to break the law? No, we have to use photo radar to start in school zones, and that's why on Bank Street, in the zone leading from the glebe as far as Hopewell Public School, I have had that area declared a school zone, the length of it now, so that's one of the first places we're going to see photo radar. That's a great start. That place really needs it, but we have to go further than that.
We need to ask ourselves this: what is going to work? Bullets work, yes. Speed bump work, yes. Photo radar works as well, so we have to have it in the mix. But different things work for different people. So for some people, speed bumps will be it, and they'll slow down. For other people, photo radar might actually not work. I believe it should be in place. For those, it's going to work for. But for some people, they'll simply bring out that checkbook, they'll write the check, and they'll carry on speeding. Ultimately, it's a design issue. If we're going to stop speeding, we need narrower streets. We need complete streets. We need to make it so narrow that you can only go at a set limit, or you're at risk of danger to your own car. Then I think people will stop. So my belief is, let's make as many streets as possible complete streets. That way we have narrower, curvier streets that mean that no one is really going beyond the speed limit.
Well, it seems like we're all in violent agreement here, and I think it's important, David, because you've been in office now for nearly a decade, and you may believe in these things, but where has been the coalition building across this city to ensure changes are coming and to ensure that these sorts of things are implemented? And I'll pose that question to you. How because I see you voting with the mayor more often than with the progressive wing of council. I'll be honest with you, and so what are you doing to build coalitions to ensure that these sorts of things become a reality?
Well, first of all, that's a preposterous accusation that I voted more with the mayor than with the so-called progressive group of council.
That's the facts.
I vote with the mayor when I agree on something, and I vote my own principle stand when there's a case where I do not agree. And that's the way I'm always going to do things. Where was I on this? I was working with people like Trevor Hache. I helped to bring speakers to the city. I helped to speak myself and find venues for sustainable transportation, healthy transportation events. I can recall the one at Ottawa U. I worked with a number of people reaching out. This was a collective effort funded by my office and a couple of other offices to actually do a study that council wouldn't agree to fund. So when council wouldn't agree to fund a congestion pricing study, we paid for it out of our own money. And so that is the kind of thing that I have done and I will continue to do.
Well, you can blame council all you want on this issue, but those sorts of things have not been done on multiple issues across this ward. And that's why you have 4 credible challengers right now, because they're seeing that coalition building needs to be more in your repertoire.
Time. So let's go back to Christine McAllister. I asked you the question. You get 30 seconds.
So look, there are a lot of opportunities in our ward to make improvements, and we have a number of tools to do that. And we've talked about photo radar, speed limits, better street design when the streets are being redesigned, which is happening all over the ward, a safer cycling corridor, particularly on Bank Street, and enforcement. Ultimately, the people who have the most knowledge of the impacts of what's happening in terms of traffic are the people who live on the streets. And so working with residents to identify the problem areas and find the best solutions to solve those problems is what's needed.
All right, thank you. So that wraps up our discussions of the important topics in Capital Ward and throughout the city. We're going to move to the closing statements now. Once again, each candidate will have a minute to speak to you. We'll do those in the reverse order of the opening statements. So we'll start with Jide Afolabi. Go ahead.
Thank you. At the beginning of this session, I was talking about my future version of Ottawa and what that looks like. It's a version in which large, flat rooftops are green. One in which people know that a swarm of green shirts means the Ottawa Tree Corps, a proposal of mine, are active at work. It's a future in which residents can stop developer variances that go overboard. And we would bring traffic calming and road sharing together by building complete streets, like I just spoke about. There is much we can be proud of if we go down this road, this version of Ottawa. So I invite you, take a peek into that Ottawa. Visit bringboldback.ca, my website. It's a version you can believe in. It's a version we ought to live in, which is why on the 22nd of October, I'm asking that you begin the journey towards that Ottawa with me. I thank you for your time. I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next up is David Chernushenko. You have 1 minute as well.
Thank you. I spoke last election about a 100% renewable energy Ottawa. That was the election nobody covered because they assumed that I was going to be the winner. Well, that is not the case this time. We have a very strong group of people, all of whom have great ideas. I'm going to continue to champion that idea here because I'm going to speak clearly and forcefully in this campaign about the #1 issue we face, climate breakdown. More than just climate change, climate breakdown. But there's a way to address that, and that's renewing Ottawa. We've started with our energy evolution strategy, which I made a term priority. It now must be fully fleshed out, funded and understood and supported by everyone. It all fits together in my platform. A green official plan, affordable housing located near excellent and affordable transit, renewal of our urban forest and life-giving trees, safe, vibrant streets kept in good repair for all users.
All right, thank you. Anthony Carricato, you're next. You have 1 minute.
Thanks, Mark. I want to start by recognizing David Chernushenko for all the great work that he's done in Capital Ward. Recognizing this, however, David has done his time. He's earned the opportunity to take a step back and let someone with new energy take over the reins. My experience working for the Speaker of the House of Commons for over a decade has given me the opportunity to build consensus and explore collaboration. What we need more than ever as an urban councillor is to be able to reach across to our allies in the suburbs and in the rural parts of our community so that ultimately we come together and get results for all of our communities. It's time to continue progress. It's time to move forward. It's time to bring our community to the next level so we can continue to see it thrive. That's why on October 22nd, I ask for your vote so we can bring new energy to City Hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shawn Menard, you're next.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I want to thank the fellow panelists up here. Everyone is up here for the right reasons, and I appreciate the debate we had today. Thanks for staying with us to the end of the debate. You know, our campaign is about not just presenting new ideas, but it's about backing those up with real solutions and actions. We've been doing that in Capital Ward. Our team will not only be a strong voice on development issues, we will ensure things like affordable housing, poverty, affordable transit, cycling and walking, and ensuring that social services are also top of mind. I've organized at City Hall in the past. I led the campaign to get the U-Pass implemented at Carleton and Ottawa U. I've actually built coalitions to stop the expansion of the urban boundary in the City of Ottawa while Larry O'Brien was in court on a 12-11 vote along with groups like Ecology Ottawa. I've got the experience doing this, and on October 22nd, I hope I can count on your vote. Go to shawnmenard.ca to see more. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And finally, Christine McAllister, go ahead. You have 1 minute as well.
Thank you, Mark. I'm excited that in this election, voters have a choice of credible candidates to select from in Capital Ward. You've heard each of us talk about some important issues and how we propose to manage them. These include traffic safety, planning and development issues in our ward, and transit. And it's up to you to decide who you think is best suited to serve the community and achieve results for the ward. I have a long track record of connecting with residents through my community association work. I delivered results by influencing local developments, protecting local green space, and establishing new parks. I'm running because Capital Ward needs a councillor who's open, accessible, and listens, and one who engages with the community. I care about a community where people's voices are heard and where they feel they belong. On October 22nd, I'm asking that you vote for me, Christine McAllister.
All right, thank you. And thank you to all the candidates for participating in the debate. Best of luck in the rest of the campaign. I will remind you that Election Day is October the 22nd. There are advance polls as well that you can vote at, whether you're in Capital Ward or anywhere else in the city. And our coverage of the results of Election Day begins at 8 o'clock when the polls close on October 22nd, right here on Rogers TV and simulcast on 1310 News Radio. I hope you can join us then. Thanks for watching.